Welcome to Mapping for Selves-Help, how to use roll calls, maps, and diagrams to describe and improve internal dynamics. We're the Chris's, and our contributors today are Chrissy, Almarissa, and Fawn. What is a head map? Broadly speaking, a head map is any attempt to represent factors of our subjective reality in an external medium. And that doesn't have to be very difficult. It can be a list of the people in your system, a list of system features. It can be a diagram, an org chart. It can be an internal landscape map. It can be face claims, group portraits, individual drawings. It can even be a playlist of different songs that each person in your system identifies with. It's been done as collages, vision boards, and it can be any kind of like an auxiliary diagram, a role map, a value map, a skill map. So even if you don't have an internal landscape or you don't know very much about your system, you can always start with something. Our first head map was an internal landscape map that we did in 1986, shortly after we found each other. It was just before the end of April, I guess. Since then, we had done many different physical maps, including an attempt to make a embroidered map, like a hand-embroidered map. And we tried to do paint maps and things like that. But generally, the more difficult the medium and the more complicated the map, the more likely everything inside is going to shift around and move before you're even done with it. So we eventually moved to computerized maps with components that could be moved around easily. So it was easier to rearrange or to take an older one and update it, add new people, or move things around as needed. And there's diagramming software that helps with that, so we can talk about that later. Now we're back to kind of pencil sketching some ideas. We did a lot of renovations in the last couple of years in our internal landscape, and we're trying to figure out ways that our new internal landscape and our polyfragmented group and subsystems can work with the map and try and, I guess, make the two work together more closely so that it's to our benefit, both the internal world and how we're configured inside to try and improve our operations and our communication even more. So we're doing some very deliberate internal landscaping lately. So why do we create head maps? Head maps help us organize our internal community, and they help us to combat derealization and depersonalization. It also works with denial. Because if you have a head map on the wall, or if you have one in a book that you can open up, it's easier to see the evidence that each other exists to help combat those dissociative symptoms. Another reason we've created head maps is to keep our shared history of ourselves and the rollout and discovery of each other, kind of to keep record keeping and to map out our shared history together as a group. Sometimes the first time we're asked to even make a head map comes in therapy. So sometimes it's somebody outside of our body who's like, I can't keep all of you straight. Do you have a list? Or a therapist who says, hey, you should map. And it's not always clear why they're asking you to do that. It can be very easy to get caught up in why do they want to know and getting paranoid about it and so on. Separate out whether or not you make a map from whether or not you show it to anyone. Those are two separate issues. So one reason to create a map is sometimes to share it with external people, as long as you have healthy boundaries and that they're not trying to manipulate you. But it's also just intrinsically good to make a map in the first place for all the other reasons we're listing. One way we've used maps internally, so we have these external maps, the handwritten the computerized maps, the printables, the charts on the wall, and things like that. We have the external maps, and that's very useful, but we also keep a roll book, a list inside as well, so people can be checked off for attendance at meetings and things like that. So having a list, having a map is a great way to take attendance. You can quickly scan your meeting room and see if anybody's missing. It's also helpful if you're doing voting. So no matter what voting system you have, your internalized map, your attendance taking, your polling, they can all be done with your list. And another reason to have a map is having a map in and of itself is kind of an act of empowerment. It's evidence against the system that the singular-centered world that we live in, having this physical map in this world in which they only acknowledge the one body as being a person, it's powerful to have in this world a representation of subtype of the people on the other side of that boundary between the internal and the external world. It's good to have that internal world represented in the external world. So to be named, to be described, to be seen is very powerful. And to see each other is very powerful. The act of creating a map involves introspection and communication inside of your system. So in itself, creating the map reinforces the connections, and it gives a very concrete shared project that your whole group can work on that's fairly easy to complete as a group. So it gives you a shared goal and a shared task that you can all work on. And we'll talk in a few minutes, we'll talk about the pressure that can create, but these are the good reasons why you would want a map. The other reason is for selves-exploration. The other reason is for selves-exploration. By turning your inner eye and looking inside and taking lists and so on, you can actually find new people. You can figure out things that feel right or more right. So you kind of play a little bit of a game while you're making the map. Where does this go? Does it feel right here? How about over there? It's a form of exploration of what's going on inside. Then there's some really good reasons to create head maps that are very therapeutic, and they definitely work in the self-help realm. So more than just, a feel-good project, there's actually some really solid things that you can do by creating head maps and working on them. When you create a head map, it's easier to get kind of a topography of your group and start looking for the gaps. You look for the missing people or the parts in your map. Sometimes it's obvious when you're doing it. It's like somebody's over here. There's somebody else here and we don't know who they are. It's niggling in the back of my head and there's something missing. And so it kind of can be an indication that there's something to seek out, or there's somebody who can be found. Another thing that you can use the head map for is describing and improving your internal dynamics. So once you draw your head map out, let's say it's a communication diagram of some kind where the lines between people indicate who is aware of each other, who has co-consciousness with each other, or at least communication with each other. So if you map it out like that, you can see where there are gaps in communication and where maybe it's something more emotional and these people don't like each other, so they're very far apart. You can figure out where the problems are and try to work on improving those internal dynamics. So mediators and liaisons within your head can work on how to help these two people get along better or improve communication between them. You can actually describe dynamics in your system that need improvement. We just mentioned that you can use this to see gaps in communication, but you can also use your internal maps in a proactive way by changing the map while deliberately changing the internal landscape or the inner world. We joke around, we say, order up something on Headspace Amazon. If you have a technological world, that may be very feasible inside to order something up from a company. It gets delivered by whatever the local delivery service is. You unbox it, you install the phone or whatever it is, and now you have communication, improvements within the system. As you put in a PA system, you put in intercoms or whatever it is that you as a group can do to improve your communication. It can also be planned out on your map. So when you see those gaps between people, you can draw lines. If all the lines on your map are communication channels and you see a place where there's a gap, as you're doing the ordering and you're installing a bat phone or a direct line between people inside, you can also put that line on the map outside. So it's kind of a cause and effect relationship between changing your map and what's going on inside of your system. Kind of both happening in parallel. It's hard to describe otherwise, but we're going to talk a little bit about internal landscaping. The other benefit, and this ties into the next benefit, which is planning renovations and doing internal landscaping. So we've done maps, we've done internal landscape maps, let's say. And then looking at that, said, we can improve this. There are these extra walls here. There's a corridor where there doesn't need to be. Why don't we renovate our internal space? So we'll plan out our renovations on paper in the external world and sketch out a drawing of the changes we want to make inside. And then the folk who are handy inside of our system, the woodworkers and the more creative folk and so on, will actually go and do it. So they'll be like, oh, great, we've got plans. Excellent. So now we're going to tear down this wall. We're going to expand this space. We're going to, take this out, put that in. And they actually implement the changes that are on the physical map in the external world. They'll take them to the internal world. And over the course of days or weeks, they'll actually implement the changes. Mapping it can be very helpful towards realizing it as something in your internal reality, bringing it into internal reality, as opposed to external reality. So we kind of call it a head map, and other people can call it a system diagram or whatever, inner world map, or a system diagram, I don't know what else people call it. Just a map, maybe. So there are probably different terminologies for what we're doing. The word head map came from bootstrappers like us. We would call it a head map. I don't know whether that's a community or not, but the people who were working on internal issues had maps too. Sometimes, interestingly enough, I don't know if you know what a MUD is or a muck, multi-user dungeon, or a muck is multi-user, I don't remember. But these were text games, or they were originally intended to be games, and people would make their own of their internal world, and they would use them as a place to congregate with other people who were helping them work on their internal issues. So there were actually dungeons, quote unquote dungeons, that were people's internal world, and they would go in with other people and work on things and do rescue missions. Very small groups of people, like trusted friend. But this was like a bootstrapper method of doing intense trauma work, and in communities that probably weren't able to seek out a therapist. So what does a head map look like? Is there a right or a wrong way to make a head map? No, not really. The head map can look like anything. It can look like a very top-down, hierarchical, organizational diagram, or it could be a bunch of blobs on a piece of paper, or it can be a spoke and hub model, and so on. So there's many different ways of creating head maps, and we've got 9 or so different overall approaches to making a head map that we're going to describe to you later. The types of information that can be shown on a head map vary also. The first thing that we want to say is always date your head maps. As a system with 33 years behind us and a lot of head maps, we just want to say that you never know. When you dig one of these up again in the future, you may be like, I don't remember when I made this. Or who made it? You could put that information on it, like who, when. Give yourself some kind of clue in the future. Future you will thank you today, like in the future, you'll be thanking yourself today for having done it. Put the date at the very least, maybe put who, or if there's any specific like life circumstance that you want to put down on the map, some way of tracking your current state, just so that later on you can go, oh, so that's what was going on. So things that can happen in a head map, the types of information you can have in a head map include a mini biography, like just a Twitter size biography. Alternate names for each other. Sometimes a person will have nicknames or other versions of their name, or older names if you wanted to trace how they came about. Maybe they had a name before and they added a new name or prefer a new name. So maybe alternate names. Their age, their gender, maybe their orientation or their pronouns. Their perceived age, but you can also put the body age of when they first appeared, or maybe when they were created. And if you know the date, you can put the date. You can put their species or their type. I'll go into types in a moment. But their species or their type, not everybody's human. You may not have a human-centric system. Like we specify who the humans are because most of us aren't. So to us, it actually, isn't assumed that everybody's human. You might put their origins. Introject, fictive, tulpa, construct, walk-in, whatever they are. So you might put their origin if that's relevant to your system. Another thing, you may or may not want to track this externally, but you may want to track this internally, and we do, is notable traits or tells. So as internally perceiving individuals, because we have a lot of co-consciousness, we can tell who's fronting. We're all blendy and stuff like that, but we can tell who's fronting by tone of voice. Hawthorne has restless leg issues, so if we have bouncy leg, we know it's Hawthorne. So there may be tells for who's front. And tracking that inside can be very helpful if you have depersonalization issues, or later on when you get really blendy and more co-conscious, it can be difficult to tell who's fronting, or if it's a combination and things like that, because we're all like basically crowded around front, and it's hard to tell who is in control. You can track individuals' skills, their interests, their values, their religion, their favorite songs, their anthem song, their power song, and so on. So basically the types of information you put in your map is completely up to you. But there can be many, many different things put into a map. And I promised you we'd talk a little bit about types. Headmates, others. Not every system has every type. If you hear some types, you're like, I don't know what that is, or we don't have any of those, that's fine. But that can be littles, bigs, middles, people, parts, non-humans, alters. It can be fragments. It can be aspect or facet. So it's a person as a whole, but they have different faces. So an aspect or a facet. It can be a subsystem. There can be veils and masks. They're the same thing. A mask is over the whole system, and a veil is over a subsystem. So if you know what a mask is, if you mask in public so that nobody can tell all of you apart, you always use the same voice or close enough. The same voice, the same facial expressions, the same movements, the same external appearance. That's a mask. That can happen for subsystems too. So inside of your subsystem, it's not a person per se. It's a coding on top of the subsystem that kind of homogenizes all of their behavior so that they all appear to be the same. So that's called a veil. And then there's the gatekeepers and hosts. The host, or the person who fronts in the external system. You also can have a host or somebody who fronts in a subsystem, and that's called a subsystem gatekeeper. Within the lines between individuals, you can have boundaries, just walls and stuff. You can have links and conduits, which are communication channels. So sometimes it's communicating emotions or spiritual information. It can be actual telepathy and other kinds of links, like they're related somehow. And conduits are when you have links between members that pass through subsystems. So it kind of goes underground, like underground wiring that brings electricity to your house. So there's an underground link that goes between members of subsystems or external members and somewhere inside of subsystems. So it passes through boundaries, if you will. So links that pass through boundaries can be considered to be conduits. And then there's system fixtures. You may have constructs within your system that actually serve a purpose. Like many of us have some kind of an object inside of our system that allows us to take front. We have a front door. People step into the doorway and they're in front. We can have more than one person in the doorway. Usually only one person's at the controls, or we can split the controls actually. So somebody controls this half of the body and somebody else controls that half. Somebody controls the hand while somebody else has the rest of the body. So yeah, our controls can also be multiple people at the same time. And then there's mental constructs. So we're talking about fixtures. Now we're going to talk a little bit about mental constructs. There are tulpas, which are intentional mental constructs. Programs, which can be either intentional or unintentional, or they can be passed to you. That's not so great, but there are RA discussions during the conference to discuss programming, which is when somebody else inserts programs into your system. But you can make benign, good programs within your own system. And by which I mean, like right now we have a program where we need to track our mileage. We're a business owner. Every time we get into our car and we're on a business trip, we have to write down the mileage. We put a business card on our dashboard. It's not interfering with seeing the gauges, but it's lying right where we can see it through the steering wheel. So if we look down to check our gas and stuff like that, the business card is right there. That business card we've tagged mentally with a program. When we see the business card, we will remember to write down the mileage. It's called an implementation intention. It's a way of actually intentionally making a mental program that is an if-then statement. If this, then that. If I see the card, I will write down the mileage. And that's a shared program between like all the members. It's kind of attached to control and front. So when we see it, we do thing. And it's benign. It's not hurting anyone. It's not interfering with our internal world in any way. It's something we just have to do. And we're not in the habit, so we've made ourselves a program to help us do it. And we have an article on implementation intentions on the kinhost.org site. So if you just write down like implementation, because there's not that word doesn't exist that many times on the site. So if you look up implementation on kinhost.org, that article should be one of the ones that pops up. There's also functional fragments, which are kind of a collection of these like kind of programs, or more, how do I put it? More elaborate programs that sit in our system as objects. So we see them as objects. We consider them functional fragments or appliances in some ways, not to insult the mental energy that goes into them, but we put something in and something else comes out. So one of the oldest ones we've had is our language filter. Not all Chris's speak English. Took us a good long time to create. I guess we did it subconsciously, but we created this kind of cobbled together appliance that helps us communicate with each other and externally. It translates what we say in our native languages into English and vice versa. It's kind of like a Babelfish in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There's a Babelfish. There's universal translators in some sci-fi. It's kind of like one of those. It's kind of a universal translator. So our language filter is considered to be an appliance. Every now and then we go over, we poke it, and we say, "Hi, can you think yet?" Poke, poke, poke. Or, do you have a I think, therefore I am? And we don't get a response from it. We're like, okay, it's still a functional fragment or an appliance. So it's just there to be utilized and has not gotten sentience. Now, mental constructs, tulpas are kind of along the more cyborg robot end of an AI in that it can run around and fetch things. Tulpas can go from being functional fragments, assemblages of different programs, to having sentience. And so most tulpas that we hear about in the community are ones that have achieved sentience. But the original idea is that it's a programmed construct. It's a mental construct. So you can have a tulpa, which is an elaborate mental construct that you've created that does errands and things like that without having sentience. And then you can have tulpas who gain sentience and are people in their own right. Before we go through actually how to create head maps, we want to give some tips for creating head maps. Firstly, allow individuals to hide. It's very important, actually. So the idea of creating a map can be very scary to some members of your system. Some of us were built to hide. Not all of us, but some of us were built to hide. And shining the flashlight around and poking in corners can really scare the bubblegum out of some people. So you don't want to run around with the flashlight and halogen lamps and stuff, scaring them. Not everybody needs to be on your map. So you can completely respect those who want to hide and just map the people that are willing to be put on the map. Again, date your map. Make sure you save versions of your map. So when you use a program and you go to save, make sure you save as when you make a new map. And put the date in the file name or something so that, it's always a different name for each version. And it's very easy to tell them apart. And that said, also make backups. If you have physical maps, take photos of them or scan them and save them someplace safe. Unfortunately, there have been systems who have people who want to be in denial about being a system. And so the same way that the map can help be quote unquote proof that you all exist, those who want to stay in denial can be annoyed by that and try to destroy them. So it may be a good idea if you give a copy to a trusted friend to keep on file and things like that so that it doesn't get destroyed. The whole idea of doing the map is to make progress and not to try and be perfect. No matter how hard you try, the minute that you're done with a perfect head map and everybody stand still. Okay, now you make a map. No matter what, the moment that pen comes off the paper at the end of the map, they're going to start moving again. It's like, okay, you're done. Great. We're going to move. And it's going to throw your map off. These are internal relationships that you're diagramming and people that move around. There are processes. There are landscape that's ever changing. This is all organic. It's like you're in biology class and they take that snapshot of what's going on in a cell, one one cell of a creature. That's a snapshot in time. The mitochondria does not just sit there. The DNA just does not just sit there as a ribbon. It's actually always unzipping and making copies. mRNA, which is like memory stuff, and the RNA, which makes copies of stuff. There's stuff going on all the time. Enzymes are moving and sodium pumps are pumping, and it's like the cell is a living creature. So they give you this snapshot of a cell frozen in time. If it were a real cell, it would be constantly moving around. We're just like that. We're a system. We move around. We're organic. So don't expect your map to be accurate at any point. Even while you're in the middle of it, things can move. But even if you said, hey, everybody, shh, stop where you are. Stand still for a moment. I'm going to draw where we are. It doesn't matter. It doesn't take very long for it to be out of sync already. So it's a snapshot in time. Don't expect it to be perfect. Be happy that it's somewhat accurate. And it's all about your subjective reality. Nobody is saying that what's on the paper or what's in the diagram has to be true. It just has to be true for the person documenting it at the moment, or true enough or close enough that they're satisfied with it. So you get to the point where, you're drawing it out and you're like, okay, I'm all right with it. This works. And you stop, and then things start moving around again inside. And that's okay. It's like, all right, that was good enough. I got it for now. This will still serve its purpose. It's accurate enough. And if things change enough, and 10 days down the road or 10 years down the road, you say, oh, that's it, I got to do another map. That's fine. You can do a map a day if you really want to, but I don't suggest it. Although maybe you want to do different types of maps. So today it's a communication map. Tomorrow it's a derivation map. The next day it's a value map. So you can take the opportunity to do different types of maps. You don't have to stick to one kind of map. So mediums. Like, what are you going to use? How are you going to do this? Start out with pencil and paper with a big eraser, because it's just easier to sketch it out. You may soon find that you have too many people or too many moving parts, or you need to erase too often. And so you might get fed up and want to move to a digital medium at some point. If you want to do something really beautiful and pretty that you can hang on the wall, that's great. Just don't expect it to remain accurate per what I've already said. Like us working on, we had some beautiful silk cloth. We've got silk thread. We're kind of spiritual. So we're like kind of working with the internal spiritual stuff, and we're embroidering this map, and it was just taking so long. We had each person's individual symbols and their name. Maybe the symbols might be how they drew their name in their own language or something, but whatever it was, it's like they had their symbols. We had them all arranged really pretty. And yeah, it was just taking so long just to work on this map. But we were working on internal head work at the same time. So the elaborateness of the map made sense in the context that it was helping us move boundaries. It was helping us work on internal connections, find people. Nothing is nothing is more interesting than you sit down and you're working on a map and somebody comes up and says, hey, don't forget me. That's really an interesting way to find people, is you put all of your names on the map as you're working, and somebody says, don't forget Sue. Like, Sue? Who's Sue? I'm Sue. Oh, hi, Sue. It's nice to meet you. Where should I put you? It's interesting when you're working on a map and all of a sudden new things are coming up. Put a wall there. Don't forget the wall. Oh, there's another room. You forgot about this room. Wait, so-and-so has a connection with so-and-so. Oh, I didn't know about that, really? Or I know more about this side of the system. How about I'll work on this side, you work on that side? It can be collaborative. It can be a discovery process in and of itself. But this is where pencil or electrons usually comes in better than paint and pens. Or what's really fun, or not fun, but it's simple to make a rearrangement, is to use either index cards or Post-its. if you're like doing heavy rearranging, instead of erasing and erasing and erasing, you can actually put the individuals on index cards. So you can do it in marker or pen. If you want to put more information about them on the card, you do it in the top, and then you can use the rest of the card for information. But then you can lay them out in a pattern and move them around until the pattern feels right, and then transfer it to paper or take a photo of the cards and the Post-its spread out. So you can take a photo of it before you stack them and put them away somewhere. It's usually easier to keep it simple first and work on beautiful and elaborate later. Some of the apps we've used on the free end would be like Dia, D-I-A. It's an open source FOSS, a free open source application it's a multi-platform application. So that would be desktop. It's Mac, it's Windows, and it's Linux. So Dia, Draw.io, DRAW.io, if you're willing to put your drawing on the cloud. Draw.io is actually pretty good. I was trying it out recently. If you have a need for a different type of software that will allow you to do more of a global view, if you have a planet, several planets, because you can hook together several planets in this application, then you might want to check out ThoughtSpace. It's free for one device. They have something like a 14-day trial that you can use it on several devices, so you could try out the application on the desktop and on your mobile apps and see which way you prefer using it before you're locked in. It's a very interesting program for creating a global perspective on your map. It doesn't allow depth, but it does allow conduits that pass through the middle of the planet. So if you have a subsystem on the northern hemisphere and another one on the southern hemisphere of this planet, the conduit will run through the middle of the planet, and while you're working on it, it becomes transparent and you can see through the planet and see the conduits running in the middle. It might help you reimagine your headspace. Scapple is a completely free-form program, but it's paid. It's about $20 by Literature and Latte, and that's Mac only. My whiteboard application is Explain Everything Edu. I think it has a price tag on it, but it's pay once. They Explain Everything also has another app that they make it sound really tempting, but it's a per month, and you wouldn't want to do per month. But there's ways to make written out text into individual objects in the program so you can move them around. The links between them won't move around, but you can move the actual objects around so the names can be moved around independently of each other if you learn how to do it. On the more expensive end of the spectrum, there is Visio, which is like a Windows program. And on the Macintosh, there's OmniGraffle, which is really pretty. We did our chiclet maps. You'll see the chiclet maps. We did the chiclet maps in OmniGraffle, but we keep trying to use the free trial. So every time we get a new computer or whatever, it's like, yay, we could do our map again, because it remembers us. So we can like install and make a new map. Then there's the really free, cheap, and easy stuff. So pencil and paper, napkin sketching. Basically anything that allows you to erase, to cross out mistakes, or to kind of feel out what feels right and start experimenting is a good idea. Make it really easy on yourself. So how do you create a head map? How do you do it? So many people get lost before they even start. I don't do art. I make excuses. I don't do art. I don't know what to do. I'm lost. My therapist said to make a head map. What do I do? Start out with a list. Who do you know in your head? Just write them down. And if somebody says, don't put me on the list, don't. That's it. So just start with a list. List people. Any other head map you make is going to start with a list anyway, whether you're mentally checking them off or doing a roll call while you're doing it, or you actually have a physical list. So you may as well make a physical list. It's easy to start with. So what your therapist probably wants is a list of who. And they may not even want it. They may actually just be asking you to do it for your own benefit. For all those other reasons we stated, internal collaboration and community and communication and finding people and letting people come up to the surface who maybe weren't inspired to before. The process is of value in and of itself, and that may be why your therapist is asking. If you don't know why your therapist is asking, ask them. Do you want me to show this to you, or do you just want me to do this for my own benefit? It's not a hard question. So the very easiest first map would be a heat map. You have a list of names of the people who are willing to be counted, let's say, and pick one. Pick any of them, put them in the middle of the paper or wherever feels right. Put them somewhere. And then start playing a game of hot and cold with your mind. You pick another name on the list, and you say, well, how close to them? So let's say we have person A, and we have person B, the first person and the second person you pick on the list. Person A feels right over here on the upper right-hand side of the page. Now, where does person B go? Well, they feel more like they're far away, so we're going to put them more towards the bottom of the page, kind of far away from them. That feels about right. Okay, now you pick person C. Well, between A and B, where do they feel like they fall? So kind of a litmus test, a stomach feeling, a gut instinct. Just where does it feel right? You can also look at the list and say, okay, who feels closest to person A? And you can go by that. You can look up and down the list until you say, okay, this one feels the closest. And you pick them out of the list and you put them closest to person A. And you keep taking names from your main list and adding them to the map until it feels right or done or good enough. That's a very simple map. We're not even getting to like drawing lines between them or anything like that. You can, certainly at that point, if you're inspired to do more, go ahead. But just as a starter map, like a very simple, no complications map, that's probably the first thing that you would do, is kind of like a heat map. The next one might be an org chart style or a family tree. So you can start with somebody. If you want to start with your host, that's fine. You're one of your hosts. Or if you want to start with someone else, but you can make somebody into the trunk of the tree and start doing kind of a family style tree. Or you can do an org chart. You start with somebody at the top instead of the trunk. Now you start with somebody at the top and you kind of work down the connections. Like, who's the next layer? Who's the next layer? Who's the next layer? The org charts with departments work well for subsystems. So you might have a host for the main system, and then you have subsystem gatekeepers would be the next level down. And then underneath the gatekeeper, you'd have their subsystem members. And if any of those are gatekeepers of their own subsystem, then they would have some branches off of them. So you'd have a multi-layered map. In that case, the lines and connections actually kind of mean something in a hierarchy sense. They could be just connections in terms of power and control or closeness to front or whatever you call it. You know, it's up to you what these things represent. And then you can also do org chart style for derivations. This person gave way to these two, and then this one of them. So A gave birth to B and C, and then C also became D and E. So you can show a map of how people came to be. And they may, A through E may all exist at the same time. Just because somebody inspired a new person in your system doesn't mean they went away necessarily. But you can make all these derivation and origin maps and stuff. So what other kinds of maps? So we've gone through 3 so far. We did the list, the heat map, the org chart or family tree style. So a hierarchical style, a branching style. The next type would be an internal landscape or diagram or map of your internal landscape. Sometimes these maps have the system members in them, and you put people where they appear or where they live, what rooms they have, and things like that on your map. Or it can just be the worldly features and not have the people. It can also include other features of your internal world. So we were talking about quote unquote appliances. It's like, where does our language filter appear in our internal landscape? It's not invisible. It's actually an object. It's a thing that's in our internal landscape. So we have a representation of it on a map. So you can make an actual map. It can be a rough sketch, napkin sketch kind of thing. It can be something more elaborate. Maybe you stumble on some map drawing software and you actually draw a map. And then next would be communication maps. Now you're making maps more like the heat map, but with lines connecting people. It doesn't have to be a hierarchical map or a bottom-up family tree style map. It can actually be more like a heat map, but you're showing the communication lines between everyone. So that's where I was talking earlier about links and conduits. That's where communication comes in. So the different people within the system have links and conduits between them, and you draw them on the map. And communication doesn't have to just be words or telepathy. It can be emotions and memories or somatic information. So it can be smells, it can be touch. So whatever the information is that's passing between people in your system, that's communication. Now, for polyfragmented systems, you can have an overall topography showing the subsystems themselves and the connections between them. It can be like a circle in the middle, this is front. And then like a hub and spoke model, where out of front, then you have, subsystem A, subsystem B, and then all the connections between the subsystems themselves rather than the people, but the actual subsystems. It's kind of like if your subsystems come in as towns, it would be like having map with roads between the towns. So which towns connect to each other? And where do the maps go? The seventh type of map that we're going to look at is an auxiliary map. These can be helpful maps that aren't necessarily the people or the landscape. For example, you can map out your roles, different skills that people have in your system. You can work on group values. So these maps are important, and they can kind of lay out on the table different ideas for your collective, but they're not about the people or the internal landscape per se. It's more about the collaborative, or even mapping out everybody's individual skills and then seeing who can collaborate with each other within the system. Or if you don't know each other very well, maybe having a skill map would be helpful to know who to turn to for certain things. So you can do auxiliary maps that show how different information relates to each other within your system and how wide and deep your system goes on different topics. And another type of map. I know, got all these different, I said I had 9, right? So 7 was auxiliary maps. 8 is collages or image maps. This would include face claims, even if if you want to consider it this way, an individual's face claim. But it can also be a group portrait. So some systems have drawings of all of their system members, kind of like they all stood still for a moment with a pretty background. They're all wearing their fanciest clothes and they paused for the camera. So there can be group portraits. You can also make really decorative maps. There can be face claims in those decorative maps, or landscape features, different moods of the various inhabitants. So it could be like a mood map, something like the heat map, but without like just circles or names. But it could be just like a mood map. You're the only one that's really going to be looking at the map, so you don't have to worry about what anybody else thinks. In this case, it's your piece of art on the wall, and you're the only person that needs to know what it means. So you can picture whatever you want. Similar to art in a way, but more new agey, the vision board. It's like a map of your future to live into as a group. So your group plans and goals, your dreams, like what do you want to be when you grow up? Where do you want to go? What does everybody agree on? You can have a actual vision board showing the different goals that people have and how it works together. So this would kind of come out of your auxiliary maps, your roles, your skills, your values. Well, once you think about those, like what is, now you can also start working on what do you want to be later on and start working on a whole head map type of thing for your future together. So a vision board is something you live into. It's, if you're going to go to school and become a therapist, it would be your ideas of what what it'd be like to go through school, get your degree, live on the other end doing therapy. So what is it that you're thinking about your future as a group? What inspires you as a group to live into the future? Oh, right. Last time we recorded this, because we recorded this and it came out 2 hours, we forgot one type of map. So we're going to add a number 10. We forgot to mention the type of map. We're going to put it in the video afterwards with like labels on the video, but we can actually talk about it this time since we're re-recording this. So we did a timeline. We actually, because we're old, we got a whole big scroll banner paper and we like attached sticks to it and made it into a scroll, literally a scroll. So this whole big banner paper, and we glued it to the sticks so that it rolls up kind of like a king's scroll. But anyway, it goes sideways, longwise, and we divided it up because it was however many feet it was, and we calculated, all right, if we put 50 years onto our timeline, or whatever, however many years it was, if we put that many years on our timeline, then each year is this many inches, 6 inches, let's say. So we have 6 inches a year, and we marked all the years and our age. And then we started putting information on the map, asking around in here, like, who knows what happened this year? Who knows what that happened that year? Okay, we moved this year. We lost our dog that year. We got married that year. Whatever, so each year we just started in pencil or whatever. We started writing down what we could remember so we could see where the gaps are. If we had trauma memories, it's like, okay, can we pinpoint where that trauma memory is from? We'd write like a little blurb about it. So now we've got this big map that has all these dates, and if we had the date, we put the actual date, and if we didn't, we just put it approximately, like what season was it, what time of year was it, how old were we. So we have this map of memories and trying to kind of piece together our life again, like what could we remember during our school years, what could we, it's much easier to kind of do it in a haphazard associative memory way. Because if we go back and just say 1985, what happened in 1985? Nothing comes up. It's like, I don't know. But if we go, okay, so wait, what boyfriend did we have first? We had this boyfriend. Then was this person. And then it was that person. And then we were dating this one. And then it was this girl. So we would like go back and figure out who we were with and start writing those down. It's like, okay, well, do we have any memories with that person? Oh, it must have been during that time. And just start like a written collage on this long piece of paper. But there's other ways of doing it. There are timeline applications. It's not cheap. It's meant for authors who are writing books, but it's Aeon Timeline, Aeon Timeline. Aeon Timeline is available for Mac and Windows, and it specializes in tracking multiple people through various timelines for authors, for, let's say, complicated murder mysteries or fantasy worlds, and you can make your own time scale in it if you are already a writer, but it's not cheap. Another alternative to that is Dia, which actually has a timeline feature, and that's where I started mine, but my timeline got too hectic for it. But then we did our physical timeline because it just got so crowded, the little timeline that we were doing. So we did a really big paper timeline. We're just paper people. Also, another way to do that timeline, instead of doing it on a scroll, you could actually have a stack of pages, paper, and just do 1 page a year. So you could either label it with the year or your age, or your year and the age. Use the 1 sheet of paper, front and back maybe, but at least the front to begin with, to jot down all these ideas of what happened that year. And it's interesting because it helps us pin down other events, because it's like, wait, no, that happened before this and after that. And so we can look at the scroll and go, well, then it's probably between here and here. So it is helpful to us to kind of pin down memories and help us put everybody's memories in one place. So you could do it with like a stapled stack of papers, 1 for each year of your life from 0 to however old you are now, or put them into like a spiral, a 3-ring binder, a press binder, something. If you're 25 years old now, it's 25 pages, but if you're 50 years old like me, it's 50 pages, and so it kind of gets thick after a while. You can add post-it notes. If you don't know which year it belongs on, you think it's around there, you can put it on a post-it note and stick it in. And if you needed to, you can move it. That would be a good project to have if you're doing memory recovery work. So let's have a little bit of a sketch here of kind of a heat map. Goodness, we're going to start in the middle with Aliessa. She's somebody a lot of us feel close to, so this is going to be challenging. But we're doing a little bit of a heat map of our own. Thinking about, and if we forget people, we're not going to worry about it too much. There's too many of us. We have Aliessa in the middle. And who feels really super close to Aliessa? Always been Telray. Very close. Another person who feels close to Aliessa is Drendel. And who feels close to Drendel is Elvair. Drendel also feels close to Star. It's kind of probably over here. And let's see. Buck feels pretty close here too. So Buck. Maybe Telray's on the wrong side of this, so we need that eraser. We put him on the wrong side because he's also closer to these people than that. So he's closer to Aliessa, but still in this kind of bundle of people. We got Justin. Who else showed up recently? No, Mickey isn't that close to Aliessa. He's not very close to anybody, really. So we're going to put him out here. Actually, I don't know. Well, we can always move people around, right? So we got Mickey. Justin's over here. Oh, well, we can't have Buck without having Fawn, who's very close to Buck. No, let's not do lines. Now, between Star and Drendel, we also have Dreel. So let's get creative here. It's close to Star and Drendel. Maybe not so close to Alvair, but we'll fudge it later. In fact, Star may not be that close to Aliessa, so maybe Drendel is a little bit wrong here. I think I know. Okay, so we get the eraser. And we're going to go Drendel, Star, Dreel, and we're okay with where everybody else is so far. So we're working on more mappy lines here. Who else wants to be on the map for our test map here? Ooh. Okay, so we're going to put Almarissa. Anybody feel close to Almarissa? Yes. Oop, we almost put the wrong name. Respect those name changes. Who else? We have, gonna change the pen color again. We have, no, not there. Okay, we got a few movings to do here. Move these people. And then we want to move Justin a little bit because he's a little too close to there. He's closer to Telray, so let's do Justin out here. So you can see like it's starting to become more clear who relates to whom. Like Sean relates to Driel, Fawn, and Star. Elvire relates to Drendel, Aliessa, Buck. Buck relates to Fawn, Telray, Elvire. So it's kind of becoming kind of mappish, right? It's a somewhat accurate, not fully accurate representation of a bunch of people in our system. Who's at the conference? We've got Chrissy. Ooh, Chrissy's way out there too. Probably here. So now that 3 people giving this presentation are on the list. Who else is at the conference? We got Buck. We got Star and Driel. Are we missing anyone? I don't think so. I think we've got all the people who are presenting on the map at least. So that's kind of a start of a map. If we were later to say, hey, okay, so now what if we started drawing lines? Well, they're married. And he's got ties to these guys, and they're twins. And they're married. Star and Driel are very closely related. This whole little triumvirate has a relationship with each other. Sean is being reparented by these two. And Justin, I think, is in Telray's subsystem. So they've kind of got a relationship. Aliessa and Drendel are parallel universe versions of each other. So you end up with this kind of loopy map, a Venn diagram, if you will, of people that are related to each other. And if we got everybody else on this map, we'd probably find everybody's in some kind of a Venn diagram situation with others within our system. But now you can kind of see relationship issues here. Telray is kind of one of Buck's fathers in our system. Actually, oops, let me undo that, because he was also fathered by Elvire and Telray. So that's why he's close to them. It's like dad's thing. Yeah, so if we straighten this map out and rewrote it, it would probably be a little neater. You know, we could just do this center part and show it getting neater in a different kind of a diagram. Get these people out of here for a moment. Move this up so we can draw underneath it. So now we're being sloppy because it's just pencil and paper, right? Drendel, and they're in a relationship. We have Drendel, Driel, and Star in a relationship. We have Drendel and Elvire in a relationship. Let's put Buck, Telray, Justin, and then we want Fawn, right? And then we ended up making a separate diagram out of that one. Okay, well, we moved it. That helps. And then we've got Sean. Reparenting relationship there. Juan and Buck. I think that's everybody. Tell Ray with his accent. Okay, so now that's a little bit neater of a map, and it makes a little bit more sense than the first one. So we've already made 2 maps based on the heat map, and now we've kind of circled our relationships between each other. So you can really play around with a lot of this and get to the point where you can show different relationships and how people are related to each other with different colors. Like we could have colored the different types of relationships, like lover relationship between Drendel and Elvire, because they're married, versus the sisterhood between Dreelstar and Drendel, or the twins, Fawn and Buck, or a subsystem relationship like Telray and Justin, or an interdimensional relationship, Aliessa and Drendel. So we got all these different kinds of relationships, but they're all related to each other in different ways. So that's how you would start out making a couple of different types of maps. So the main point of making a head map is for it to be actually useful. And it's always better to make progress over procrastination, even if you're not getting it quote unquote right. None of this is so written in stone that right matters. It's just the act of doing that has its own value. And if you draw the head map and it's wrong, you'll know. You'll be like, there's something wrong with this. So it's not something you have to worry about. Like when I put it down on paper, it's going to change things in my head.
It doesn't work that way. When you want to make changes as a group, you need consensus, and you have a meeting where everybody can give their input, and somebody is fronting who's taking the notes. They're documenting what everybody is agreeing on internally in the external world. And then when everybody's on the same page, everybody's agreeing to this plan, then those who can go and actually make those changes. So, for example, if it's adding walls, the people with carpentry skills in the internal world will go and make the walls. So it really all starts with having a meeting and consensus.
And then you make a few sketches and you're like, yeah, this is what we want. Then you can implement the changes, but it's an act. It's not something that happens by accident. So I would say feel free to make your maps. Like let it be liberating and not something that you get overly bogged down in whether you're getting it right or not. The right doesn't matter. It's a practice and a progress, and something that over the course of years you may do many times, and you will get more comfortable with it over time as well. You don't have to get so very bogged down in right or perfect or what style. It's so not about what other people think about what it looks like. It's not for them to use, if you will. It's really much more for you to use. You can make somebody a cheat sheet. We did that recently. We made like a cheat sheet of like the top 10 fronts for Chris's, or the top 10 frequent fronts of the month kind of club. We made like a little cheat sheet with like a little tiny bio and some tips for people. So it's like if you're dealing with me and you see this, that, and the other thing, it's probably this person, but it's like not set in stone because our fronts rotate often. The 5 or 10 that are most frequent now might not be next month. And so it's not like it's giving people a whole lot of power over us to give them a sheet. So in our case, we consider that to be very safe, but for other people, it wouldn't be, and you wouldn't want to do it. So make sure that whatever you do fits you. If you've just walked into therapy with a new therapist, and one of the first things they're doing is asking for your map, and they're getting really pokey about the type of information you want to put on the map, say no. You want to wait until you have rapport to give anybody a map. You have to trust them to give them the map. And that's okay. So don't feel pressured to do the map just for them. The idea of doing the map is for you. And then you choose to allow people to see it. So you can draw a map. Your therapist can say, go draw a map. You can draw a map and never show it to the therapist. Even if the therapist says, I want to see your map. Oops, sorry, forgot it. No, I don't trust you enough. I don't think you've passed muster yet to deserve being shown our map. Whatever it is, that's a fair question. You can draw boundaries in your relationship with your therapist. And if they write down treatment resistant, you probably should walk and find another therapist, but that's on them. They can write down whatever they want. Your map is not a therapeutic tool. It's not in the ISSTD guidelines that you should be doing a map and that the therapist has to see it. If they want to deal with you and have trouble remembering your names and things like that, it might be helpful to them. But our therapist has not said any of our names yet, has not addressed any of us by name. Even though a couple of us have mentioned names in therapy, they're not asking. It's out of respect. There are people who want their therapist to say their names and interact with them as individuals. We like the fact that our therapist is being respectful and allowing the safety of the group and just deals with whoever shows up in therapy rather than poking around. So we appreciate that. That helps us build trust with them because they're not being pokey and they're not exploiting the members of our system. So we'd like that. That said, if you've done a map and you like your therapist and you trust them and you want to share it with them, by all means share it with them. Show them your map. So I want to thank you for joining us for this presentation. We're really excited to get this information out of our head and into the world, and we hope that it's been very helpful for you. If you need more information on mapping, you can ask us questions through kinhost.org on the contact form, or you can look for headmap pages and write in the comments if you think your questions and the answer that we give would be helpful to other people. Please do it in the comments. This way it's preserved for everybody and it's not just a private answer to you about your specific situation. If it's something more generic and helpful to everyone, then we can put it in there for everybody else too. Thank you very much for joining us. We're very excited to get this information out there, and we hope you have a great day. And please, whatever you do, take really good care of yourselves.